In 2012, Kenya's economy has been on a tightrope. Policymakers have had to walk a fine line between stabilizing the economy and maintaining the growth momentum. ABN's Loise Wachira caught up with Johannes Zutt, who's the World Bank's country director, for insight into the year that was and his 2013 expectations.
Well, obviously in 2012, we had some difficulties in the macroeconomy. The exchange rate escalated very, very sharply at the end of 2011. Beginning of 2012, it was still quite elevated. The inflation rate was quite high. The government took appropriate action in response, and in particular, the central bank raised the bank rate significantly by, I think, a total of 11 percentage points, and that helped to return macro stability to the economy. And that was a very important move. And as a result, we've seen a much better foundation for growth going forward.
We had discovery of oil in northern part of Kenya. What dynamism should this be expected to play going into 2013?
Obviously, the discovery of oil in the Lake Turkana area is a real benefit for Kenya. Kenya remains heavily dependent on imported oil, which can be quite expensive and hard to budget for because the international price fluctuates quite a lot. Going forward, it'll be very important for the government of Kenya to put in place appropriate mechanisms to ensure that the revenue that comes from this new discovery is spent appropriately over time. That requires considerable planning. Luckily, there's ample time for the government to do that because although oil has been discovered, it will take 3, 4, maybe even 5 years before first oil is reached and Kenya can actually benefit from the recent discovery.
We've seen double-digit inflation and interest rates from Kenya from the beginning of the year, but this has come down to single digits towards the end of the year. How do we expect this going forward to be?
As you know, at the end of 2011 and in early 2012, the economy was verging on macro instability. The central bank stepped in and raised interest rates, tightening monetary policy to bring the macro economy back under control. That was absolutely the right thing for the central bank to do. A consequence was that growth slowed to some degree because the private sector was less able to access credit at affordable rates. But in light of the action that the central bank took, the return of macroeconomic stability has also enabled interest rates to come down. And we expect that going forward, the private sector will be able to obtain more credit and therefore to expand over the next few years. We're projecting growth of 4.3% for this year, but for next year and the year after, we continue to believe that Kenya can achieve 5% or more, depending, of course, on how it manages the upcoming elections.
Now, for Kenya to mitigate the impact of the recession in the Eurozone, what should the focus be, considering the Eurozone is Kenya's main trade partner going forward in 2013?
Well, the good news is that Kenya's dependency on Europe for its export markets is decreasing. In fact, Kenya is already doing things to enable it to insulate itself from the impact of the euro crisis. And it needs to continue doing those things. It used to be the case, for example, that tea was principally sent to England. That's no longer the case. The key markets for tea, Kenyan tea today, are actually Egypt and Pakistan and then England. What Kenya needs to do in general is diversify its manufactured exports as well as its markets. It's doing that, but it needs to do more of that. The weak engine in the Kenyan economy is manufacturing. It has stayed at about 10% per annum over the last several decades. Services have grown quite well. The service account is actually in surplus, but the manufacturing external account is in deficit. So that's where the focus for Kenya needs to be going forward.
Now, the World Bank is predicting a 5% GDP growth rate in 2013. Do you expect this to be realized, considering it's an elections year?
Well, it's true that Kenya historically has had difficulty maintaining higher levels of growth around elections. We don't understand the exact mechanism that makes that happen. Sometimes the drop in growth occurs before the election. Sometimes, as in 2008, it actually occurs after the election. You'll remember 2007 was an election year, but Kenya experienced extremely high growth for Kenya of about 7.1% that year. It will be an important indicator of Kenya's growing maturity as a democracy, how well it can manage the economy through the next general elections in 2013. We're confident that Kenya over time is becoming better and better at ensuring that the business of government continues uninterrupted even when the country's in the middle of a political campaign.
And to this 5% GDP, what are the key contributing areas?
Every year, growth in Kenya depends on the agriculture sector. If agriculture has a good year, the Kenyan economy as a whole will have a good year as well. Agriculture only contributes about 25% of GDP directly, but approximately another 25% comes through agribusiness, which has a direct link back into the agriculture sector. At the same time, Kenya continues to be a very strong service-oriented economy, and Kenya has done quite well recently in exporting services, particularly into the rest of the East African community. But going forward, the weak performer in the Kenyan economy is manufacturing, and the government has to do everything it possibly can to enhance the ability of manufacturers in Kenya to grow and to export more of their goods to new markets.